Mhm. Well, hello, creatives, community, and kind folks. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. Thank you very much for being a co host on our show as we talk all things tabletop RPG related. And to give us a little bit of a context as to our conversation, we are doing a Monster Mayhem series where we get to talk about our monsters and adversaries that those monsters might look just like us. What was that noise? Hmm. Anyway, excuse me. And rethinking, reskinning, recontextualizing our encounters and the monsters that we use, and of course, the world's most famous role playing game and other role playing games that derive thereof. Now, as mentioned far previously, we had a little bit of fun talking about swamps and frog myths and things. And I was thinking, you know what? The idea of an amphibian monsters and amphibious adventuring, I think, uh-oh. I hope you're hearing that, Z. I do. Please tell me you guys are getting some audio because I'm I see audio happening. So just let me know if you can hear what I'm saying. But anyway, as I go on, because this might still be recording, the idea of having an adventure with thank you very much, Ush. Having a significant amount of watery dangers, aquatic elements in it, which is why I picked the word amphibian as opposed to aquatic. Okay. So we're going to talk about that dividing line between land and water, the breaking the surface and diving down deep, and using that as an element in our encounters and the kind of adversaries we can use in that. And of course, we're going to reskin, reflavor plenty of our classic monsters that may not necessarily or traditionally fit into this category, but sound pretty good to use them. So, um, one thing that we might have to delve into a little bit on a meta level as well is that, and I think this is emblematic of why one of my favorite subjects, which is the environment, and using that third pillar of adventuring, the exploration pillar, I think this is why it's not often used, and that is the idea of having rules that describe what can or cannot be done in an aquatic environment. Now, currently, fifth edition has very limited rules, not even a paragraph or two about what happens when player characters, go down into the deep. Now, I do know in the past they've printed books that had an extensive list of things that players have the capabilities of or limitations thereof when diving into aquatic regions, including descriptors on nearly every spell and their use. And so this is just a general question I want you to think of now as we start to progress through the episode of how rules light to rules crunchy for you would it take for you to use more aquatic elements, and on a bigger picture using those elements when the PCs are an environment that is not normal. So for example, it could be zero gravity or an airless void or an aerial community with floating islands and things of that nature. Maybe they're going into other planes of existence. Do you want like bullet points that you can refer to, or do you want 12 pages of detail concerning what it's like to travel, you know, the shadow plane or the negative material plane or the plane of fire? Or do you just want a couple of bullet points because you want space to not only make it easy to interact with, but to implement it on the fly when the players decide to make a left turn instead of going right, and now they've decided to go to Nirvana or the nine hells or something, and you're like, oh look, I just need a 3x5 card to figure out what would happen if they're there. So okay, circling back around to our amphibians, we would I'm thinking of monsters and adversaries that are um, equally or somewhat equally adept on land and the sea. Like the thumbnail, I used a crocodile or alligator or something, um, and frogs and our bullywogs and our frogomoths, or frog hemoths, or whatever fit into that category. A lot of amphibians actually don't breathe water; they just hold their breath, dive down for like a half hour. It's pretty awesome, and surface again. There are many predators out there that will use especially in swampy areas, they'll use the dark and dank elements of being underwater to use that as camouflage to grab the PCs. And again, how would you um that like now Gribel says I DM'd an underwater campaign. No important changes in rules whatsoever. Doing it simple was the best idea. Now, I will say, to reflect off of what Gribel just mentioned, you you don't need to change any rules. Okay, and I'm sure that hurts the brains of many of you out there when you start thinking like, all right, the PCs are on a sailing vessel that's sinking, and there are enemies coming into the open hole that is where the water's spewing into the ship, and adventure starts. What do you mean the rules aren't going to change? And so, what I mean by it is, especially with magic being such a big thing in Dungeons and Dragons and a lot of fantasy, you really don't need to change the rules on how magic works because it's magic, right? If someone casts a magic missile or a shield spell or some kind of healing spell or a fireball, you don't need to change the rules. Now, I'm sure while it's hurting your brain, you're like, well, using fire might not be the smartest thing underwater, and yet using electricity might be the one of the most desired effects. Maybe not for your allies, but there are no rules that say that needs to change at all. You could just say it's because it's magic. Sure, you can't light a fiery torch underwater, but my fireball is magical. Now, if you do decide to change the rules, my suggestion would be to change them within the confines of the rule set that you have. So, for example, fifth edition uses advantage and disadvantage. It also uses resistance and vulnerabilities, and immunities and whatnot. So I would do that. Like for example, for me, I would just if a pyrokinetic underwater or going down into the lower hull of the ship in that example of the sinking ship, I would just say that anything that's underwater would including the PCs, would have resistance to fire, and then I would tack onto that. I would probably have the effect of fiery spell. So if that same pyrokinetic wanted to put up a wall of fire when the Sahogan are trying to enter into the ship, I would probably just have the duration and have the instead of a 60-foot wall, you can only make 30 feet. I'd have the effectiveness, but that's about it. And like I said, it would apply across the board. But also, you might want to consider how fantastical or cinematic to reality when it comes to simple things such as buoyancy and sinking. Like, can dwarves in your world swim? How about constructs or a player character that is undead, or a druid that shape changes into something that doesn't normally swim, or that we don't think normally swim, like your classic, I want to change into a T-Rex. It's like, okay, what about weight? If they're standing on a barge versus a giant sailing vessel, consider those kind of things as well. So now, and come together as a group to decide those things. But yeah, and also don't you know um I would suggest not getting in arguments, but to do that after the game. Uh, you're just weird. Zamara says you're moving underwater and no swim speed training or magic. Difficult terrain movement solved. Yes, but what about like using a spear or javelin versus a hammer, or plate armor versus I don't know, no armor at all, or saving throws, or I use a charm spell on the ogre. Can the ogre, like, what about verbalizing underwater and think? I mean, you could start to deep dive into things and go down a spiral, right? When it comes to like movement or something like that. Difficult terrain is pretty simple, pretty easy. I think we could get a. I think there's a way to get a little more detail in that. Maybe if someone wants to do something pretty dramatic, like I want to swim into a tight tunnel so the giant monster can't reach me. Yeah, Pelora. Yeah, Pete. Pete's like deep dive. Yeah, I see what you did there. Yes, pun intended. Pun intended. Um, but maybe athletics checks for swimming to do to maneuver in a three dimensional space. Maybe if there's something more dramatic or something, like the PC wants to like I say, swim through a tight region so a monster's large limb can't reach them or something like that. Yeah, Gribel's like poor Earth Genasi. Now again I'm talking. I guess a better word rather than amphibian would be coastal, but I'm thinking of adventures where the player characters are, or we as the dungeon master have instituted a major water element to it, but we're not necessarily adventuring underwater. We're not eating the chewing gum and becoming marine boy. Instead, it's we're on the docks, we're on the coast, we're in a swamp, we are there is a sunken city that or a small town has been flooded, and the adventure goes from wading through ankle deep water and then watching your step as you go down to your chest, or you maybe the player characters need to swim underwater to get to an air pocket or something of that nature, and the kind of monsters that would be there and the kind of adventures. um, Using verbal components underwater. The verbal component of a spell underwater might be problematic. I'm sure you could probably get away with it once, and then you might take in a gulp, a big gulp of nasty brinish water. Dark vision might be pretty useless in dank water, considering that dark vision doesn't let you see through, or at least from what I understand, doesn't let you see through particulates. Um, and then there's other hazards as well, like for example, we still have cover. You can use cover as well. When it comes to difficult terrain, if you take a look, okay, um, I can't remember the spell. I'll make a mistake if I call it like entangle, but there is a spell that operates like difficult terrain, but instead of costing 2 feet of movement for every foot, I believe it costs 4 feet of movement for every foot. So there's a way for us um, to even modulate how much movement is reduced based on the environment. So, like for example, swimming is difficult terrain, but swimming through deep foliage might be cost 3, 4, or 5 feet of movement, or something like that. Like if you wanted to make a difference between one part of, say, a swamp versus another part of a swamp. Also, there is it ensnarement? Ensnarement spell. Okay, okay. Let's see. Gribel says, in that case, you have to be careful. Just look at video games. Nearly everyone hates underwater levels or stages because of the radical change in the system or rules in this case. Exactly. So, and it again, it depends on how much you want to embrace the. I hate to use the word realism because you could go down a deep dive, a deep spiral, and never come out of it. Much like it's the argument about firearms in fantasy, where we start to travel down a spiral that the rest of the game doesn't want us to go down, because we know how firearms operate in our modern context, and so we tend to want to, say, for example, layer on automatic fire and suppressive fire and all that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, it's like, well, yeah, but the rest of the rules, swords don't make people bleed and sever limbs and cause internal bleeding either. So you need to be careful. So I do understand the idea of like, well, I'd rather have bullet points rather than like 50 pages of detail. because when like what happens when a player uses a, I don't know, creates a wall of ice versus a wall of fire, or is a lightning bolt does a lightning bolt operate more like a fireball underwater, or what? When a a player when you drowned underwater and someone tries to revive that character, do they then begin to die again because they take a big gulp of water and they start drowning again, right? Um, there's that kind of thing, and there's all kinds of dangers, like Zamar says, a whirlpool, if you will. There's all kinds of things, whether it's a whirlpool or like Dead Man brings up ensnarement, I believe it's called. I don't remember off the top of my head. I could do a search, but I'm not going to. I prefer not to. There's plenty of dangers you can have as well. Like, for example, uh, a coastal adventure with ocean surge. I always bring up the idea of player characters getting off a sailing ship. They're on the docks. There's white capped waves and brinish water sweeping over the docks. The Sahogan again, because I don't think they get enough love. Jump onto the docks to attack the PCs with their tridents, and you know me. I love myself some environmental dangers, like getting swept off the docks into the ocean, being sucked down by like a whirlpool, or it's just simple plain old ocean surge while you're standing on a beach and getting the undertow to have to knock you down or something. There's also all kinds of plant life that's underwater, and you can of course reskin or reflavor a lot of your land-based plant like, excuse me, animals to underwater as well. And there's also the idea of a three-dimensional space where would you allow players and or enemies to swarm a player character from above and below as well as from the side? I don't know. Yeah. Zamar says, "Oh, using coral as both traps and cover, and to hide enemies." Absolutely, I'm a big proponent of like using and abusing the environment. So an example would be there are rules for a player character in a tight space. I believe it's disadvantage uh, on dexterity checks and dexterity saving throws, if I'm not mistaken. If a character moves into a space that is limited by the size of the creature. So, for example, a small space can only fit in small and what is it, tiny and small creatures, whereas a medium-sized creature um, and above may not be able to fit. And on one hand, why would a player character bother doing that? Like, let's go with the swamp. Okay, the classic old tree falls in a swamp. There's the inside of the tree has deteriorated away, so it's more like a tunnel or a tube. Like, why would a player character even want to go into a tight space? Well, maybe the limitation is not limitation. Maybe the limitation is a better benefit if, say, a dragon. I got to go with something. Okay, an aquatic wyvern is attacking one of the player characters, and the player character goes into that tunnel, and maybe the creature, which might have like 3 attacks plus, can only reach one limb down to get to the player character, or the player character is completely immune because they are far away enough from the beak or the claws or the tail or something of that wyvern. So having things in the environment for the players to like use and fiddle with, or even your enemies, like talking about like a coral reef with enemies hiding in the coral reef, it could be very razor sharp. So if the player characters want to use that as cover, it's fine, but you might get yourself cut up, all that kind of stuff. So I love those kind of things. Gribel says, my PC's killed a huge shark and used it as cover to shoot enemies while sinking. Yeah, nasty but cool, right? That's kind of cool. Of course, we have to have enemies pull our PCs down into the dank waters. Of course, there's the classic Star Wars where scene where they're in the trash compactor and, hey, what's that moving against my leg? And then all of a sudden, a tentacle wraps around someone's thigh, pulls them down underwater. The other allies can't see where their ally has been dragged to, and of course, you can't see the you know there's an enemy, but you don't know what they look like because you only see maybe a small eye poke up on a tentacle, or some kind of like a periscope or something. So that also allows us to get a little bit of like a horror element to it, especially if you have an enemy where the players don't know, or they don't even know how many enemies there are. And let's be honest, how cool is it for player characters and or our enemies to be like, to be like super spies, special forces, ninjas, like flowing, just barely breaking the surface of the water, drawing an enemy down, stabbing them in the throat, like, being super silent while they do it. I think that what I don't know, remember the movie, but there was like a Navy SEAL Special Forces movie or something where they barely broke the surface. One of them uses their suppressed firearm, shoot the enemies, and then their allies, when they went to fall in the water, they caught them with their hands and gently lowered the dead bodies into the water or something. It was really it wasn't the most active scene, but it is pretty cool. And I think in the trailer for Without Remorse that on Amazon Plus here in the States, there's a scene where Michael B. Jordan is playing, I think it's John Kelly or John Clark or something like Kelly, some combination of John Kelly and Clark, and and he takes out a bunch of guys while completely submerged and whatnot. And a lot of PCs want to be badasses, and I'd let them do that as well. Although if you want to scare the hell out of them, you can have your Sahogin or lizard folk or something do something similar, and you just see one lizard person's eyes just break the surface like an alligator, and then they go after the PCs, and then their heads just slowly sink back, and the PCs are like, "Oh, there's just one lizard folk." It's like, no, there's probably a whole lot more. All right, so co-host mentioned Mike says I've combined multiple issues together. A Sahogin, and I probably butchering the pronunciation. Let me please allow me that one slight. A Sahogin based built in a coral reef that had grown on a sleeping dragon turtle. So he had to defeat the Sahogin without waking the dragon. Ooh, I like that. I like that a lot. You know what? We often don't see multiple layers of monsters intertwined into the environment, like the Sahogin living on a coral reef on the back of a dragon turtle, or maybe there's just a very simple giant turtle with birds sitting on its back because that's where they eat small worms or something, and the turtle could care less that there's birds on its back, but it's walking through the jungle or something like that. And like I like stacking. If the PCs weren't there, what would the world be like? And I like stacking monsters and adversaries and things like that. Bandits could attack ships and dive underwater by stealing their ill-gotten gains and stuff. Anyway, okay, Z. Zamara says, or pulling what was done in One Piece, the anime, by one of Arlong's men, drag enemy. Oh, drags a PC down fast to stun them, and then next turn pushes them back up extremely quickly for damage. Ooh, like a combo effect. Grab them and like pull them down, swim down real fast, punch the hell out of them, and then make them blast their way straight back up into the surface of the water. I wonder what Thunder Wave would be like underwater if you utilize a little bit more verisimilitude. Mike Gould says, I've also run underwater gladiator encounters where captives were facing a giant shark. The players intentionally wounded the Sahogin leader to draw the shark to him. Slow clap. Slow clap. I mean, because the narrative fits, right? When you put blood in the water, cause the sharks to frenzy, you wound someone else, that kind of thing. Man, Gribal's like thunder wave, thunder spells equal double range. Either that or that would anything with sensitive ears would probably hear you from miles away. I don't know. Yeah, double range it. I don't know if you'd really want to go with the double damaging thing because that might be tweaking the numbers a little bit too much. But But hell's yeah, disadvantage on those damn saving throws. I'd do that. I don't know how much I would do it, but yeah, 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 yeah. Michael says I've also run an underwater. Oh shoot, wrong one. It moved on me. Sorry. Underwater adventures are underutilized in my opinion, with tritons, sea elves, half elves of the sea, merfolk, koatoa, coalinth, undead that don't breathe. Yeah, undead. They've got to go somewhere. Constructs also don't breathe. Eyes of the deep. Yeah, you could go on and on and on with so many aquatic and amphibian and underwater monsters. I think. Plus, I think there's space for us to have. I'm going to go at least 40% of our monster manuals probably have an aquatic version of the same beast, like aquatic. I, I know that there is the sea hag, there's aquatic trolls, and I think there over the years we've made books. Other game makers have made books with environmentally specified monsters of the classic monsters we know. So like a desert troll, an aquatic troll, or arctic troll, that kind of thing. So yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. So many options. Um, going into the. All right, so Michael says my very first out of the box encounter is out there. You guys can go ahead and purchase that. My very first out of the box encounter ever was called Chickening Out. An out of control ship either nearly collides or collides with the player's vessel. It's out of control because they were smuggling cockatrice eggs and they hatched. Ouch. Ouch. I love it. I love that kind of stuff. My players all failed every petrification save. The damaged ship sank with them petrified at sea. Ow. It's only a 24-hour petrification, but now they're at the bottom of the sea. When they wake up, they're going to be in for a bit of surprise. I'd let them hold their breath, but I don't know how deep that would be. Sheesh. Like I said, deciding whether the PC that's playing like the Warforged can actually swim or not, which, like I said, cinematically you don't need to change it. They can swim or float. But in your world, if that's not the case, and the player character's like, oh, here I go again. How many months is it going to take me to walk to the nearest shoreline? And you're like, I make a navigation roll, figure out which way you're going. Just don't head towards the trench. Man. Anyway, Michael says, I also have a homebrew tiefling variant made not from fiends, but from old ones called a thulling. I've always felt like tieflings make a great place to place other origins for them. I like them as fey creatures. But anyway, amphibian, swim speed, no horns, but they have tentacle hair. It's come up in 2 campaigns. Ooh, I like tentacle hair. I like I like the seaweed slash I don't know jellyfish style hairstyles that sometimes they artists will include with aquatic humanoids and whatnot. That'd be kind of cool. For color, they have a thick mucus-like saliva that they can use to waterproof things like leather or cloth. And that's the other thing too, as well. Like if we're going to include like some kind of aquatic element into our world, to allow the PCs maybe to, if they have the time and the resources, cash to prepare themselves. all tentacles, 24-hour tentacles. Yeah. Oh man. Anyway, maybe we should move away from the tentacle things. Okay, we're gonna move to like mollusks and crustaceans or something. Uh, but anyway, I like the idea of including aquatic elements. Now, if we can get away from, allow me to present to you a way to have aquatic elements in the game without necessarily going fully underwater. Again, we have the idea of sailing ships where the players are using like in a man-made environment. They're on a sailing vessel. You can always throw like storms at them or shallow what's the uh, uh, low tide, watching out for rocks and things of that nature. Of course, like the out of the box encounter where another sailing vessel had cockatrice eggs on it that they were trying to smuggle, and the eggs start to open, or maybe the player characters are on their own vessel and there's something that they may not know what's on the ship that or there's some other kind of encounter. And so if the ship starts to take on water or it runs aground or something like that. But there's also other ways to do it as well. Like, for example, the city of Venice is a city that's slowly sinking into the ocean. Uh, and maybe there's a city which is, has canals instead of roadways. And many of the basements and lower levels of the buildings there, or a castle's been half flooded, and so the player characters may need to navigate like up and down stairs and up and down shafts, combining swimming and navigating underwater, and of course trying to figure out, well, how do I see? Someone's like, well, I'll use a light spell on my staff and swim forward because the I don't know, the paladin in the party's like, I'm not putting my rusting my armor down in there. You go ahead and do that, wizard. The wizard's like, I gotta take off my robe. I like my robe. Um, Zamara says, if I may pull us back to the creatures, one thing I've done is give bullywugs giant frogs as like dog mounts. Yeah, and then made those frogs important in their culture. I love having you know take the PCs out of it. Of course, bullywugs would train giant frogs as like you're saying, like dogs. They would be used as mounts, or they would be used as pets. Like, giant lizards fit into that category. What are some other things out there? Also, uh, along with frogs being able to jump very far, you could give them like a climbing speed for things that scamper up into the upper reaches of the foliage in a swamp area, and giving our humanoid adversaries, just like human beings, have pets and use like birds, and we also ride on the backs of lots of animals as mounts. Giving that to our NPCs as well really helps. Who's to say that there aren't a group of orcs out there riding on the backs of giant lizards and using sturges, I don't know, or some other kind of, even bloodhawks or something out there in this half aquatic region, and they're wrapped in oiled cloth or something like that. So, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Mike Gould says their culture have no priests, but instead warlocks who are considered chosen by their creator. The normal aquatic gemstone coloration they have becomes gray with black stripes. Their word is law. Mm-mm-mm. I like it. Moving on. Oh, Dead Man brings up Eclipse Phase. Anyway, Michael continues. A city which has been only partially sunk, say because of like rising waters, may have a mixed population, landed species on the dry land and aquatic species on the water half. Oh, absolutely. And much like, I bring up the city of Venice because on its surface, it doesn't make any sense for people to live there, but people are pretty adaptable. And so why wouldn't there be a land-based culture and an aquatic-based culture that kind of merges together? That'd be pretty awesome. I mean, what if the city of Atlantis sunk over a very, very slow amount of time, and so you have yourselves like merfolk and sea elves or something, and then you have your land-based people, and they just get along really well. Why not? They walk out their back door, go down a couple steps, jump right into the water, and we also know that there are plenty of oceanic cultures around the world. And I mean, hell, I don't, hate is a strong word. I'll use hate. The ocean, because I fear it, because it's bigger than me, and has many things in it that don't want me in their environment. And it is 70% of the world. But then there's also other people in their cultures. They're like, hey, I'm going to take a smooth piece of wood and I'm going to ride on top of it. you know what? Oh, you need something to eat? Let me take a knife in my mouth and dive down in not much more than a speedo, and get some food. And I'm like, good for you, good for you. Anyway, Deadman says the Eclipse Phase adventure Overrun has hook bladders, a jellyfish-like parasite that can take over a host going into their breeding phase. In eclipse phase, which I love. We don't talk about. I got to get back into my transhumanism, uh, but the moon Europa is is known to have like a is it a 60-mile deep ocean in it because of the tectonic motion of the icy moon, so that other than a small hardened core, the entire uh, subsurface of the moon is aquatic, covered by miles of ice. And what a great that would be a great place to adventure, where the player characters are going through like icy tunnels or something. They're like, I someone told me there's an ocean down here, and then there's like upside down cities like stalactites, but they are made of ice or something like that. I think that'd be awesome. Michael says, I also have another homebrew Dragonborn variant called a Tetsudo, Latin for turtle, aquatic, slower, better AC, etc. You know what? We often don't talk about aquatic dragons much at all. Maybe that's because they're badasses, but yeah, I wouldn't want to fight a dragon underwater. Any dragon. I think blues and bronzes, greens probably would fit into there as well. There's a ton of other aquatic dragons like the dragon turtle, but I would never want to confront them on their home turf. Rival says, just remember that every time you go to the beach, a shark knows you are there. Are you talking about like Jaws 3 or something like that, where the shark follows the family when they get on a plane to go to a tropical island? Zamara says that makes for a great city idea, a la the Aztec capital. Your entire city is just built on a lake with floating clay boards and gondolas. That's awesome too. Like, okay, so in my mind, when I'm thinking of docks, I'm thinking of like solid pylons into the muck and mire, but the docks themselves are solid surfaces. But in our real world, we've seen floating cities, and what I mean by that, like they're literally floating on the surface, undulating by the movement of the water, and you could have like floating platformed cities and then linked together by floating instead of I'm trying to find the right terminology, and my mind's failing me. But you guys know what I'm talking about. So, like much like lashed together barges that link a whole city together, and I think that'd be kind of cool. And you could have underwater elements connected to each. So, for example, maybe homes don't have a backyard or something. They have like a big giant square in the middle where people jump down into the water to do things, or their allies and or pets that swim around them are able to come up on land, but the land is just lashed together boards and whatnot. I think that'd be awesome. Dead Man says, we're talking about Europa, it has a 30-kilometer thick ice shell and a 200-mile deep ocean. Is it 200 miles? Ooh, pretty incredible, I think. Strangely, even though it's much smaller than Earth, a much bigger oceanic surface, I think, as far as depth goes and stuff like that. That's awesome. Mm-mm-mm. Mm-mm-mm. I love it. Dead Man says, remember, never fight an alligator in the water. Oh hell no! You never want to go. Much like I don't know, fighting a beholder or a dragon in their lair. You don't want to fight an alligator in the water. You just, well, unless you're like 12th level or something like that. But whatever. Yeah, you don't want to do that at all. Mike Gould says, white dragons swim too. Thank you, white dragons. Yep. I've had a player underwater, a Thulling actually, who saw something massive using its wings like a manta ray. He got the fuck out of the water. Yep, GTFO. Oh man, seeing a giant uh, dragon swimming through the water like a manta ray, that would be sweet. That would be absolutely sweet. Oh, I mean, I'd need a new pair of underwear, but yeah, sweet. Zamar says, my lizard folk, uh, a teal, is in-game famous for just grappling you, biting down, and spinning when in water. That's awesome. That's all. Now, how would you reskin that? You could just use the same old rules, the grappling rules and things like that. But the that's why I have a problem with the drowning rules. Not, I think the drowning rules are perfect if you're going for a summertime swim, but I think the pressure, the panic involved in it, I think should be ramped back up, way up. Who is this? Daniel Cephas. Hey, what's going on there? Why don't you fight a water dragon in the why don't you fight a water dragon in the ocean? First fight it in Godzilla versus Kong. Nuff said. Oh, that scene is so awesome with Kong like screaming over the edge of the ship, and I'm going like, dude, you don't want to. You don't want none of that. And Godzilla just like coming out of the water and just like attacking him on the ship and then like pushing him down into the deep ocean and whatnot. You just like you don't want that. You don't want that at all. That's why you never fight a dragon in the ocean, which kind of brings up my I kind of it brings us back to the point of I feel like there are many elements of role playing narratively that we are missing because it does feel like a hesitation when our our brains and the rules we have to use them kind of have this like they don't fit, the puzzle pieces don't fit because in our minds we're like, man, wouldn't it be really cool if there's like a sinking castle or something in a dungeon and there's an ancient place and there's undead underwater and the player characters are down there and half the players are trying to scramble up the steps as the castle is slowly sinking or there's water flooding into the dungeon, and then we go, we do the hard and we're like, man, how would we use the rules? I don't know if I want to do that, and we hesitate because of that. So, yeah, I'm a little bit of that. We would have to go back to our monster mayhem thing here, but Michaels is taking a note from the much maligned episode one. One could make an underwater lizard folk city like that with the cat with captured air pockets. Um, I know it's much maligned, but I individually there are parts of all those the prequels that I love. Together I don't think they string together very well, but there are bits and pieces. I love the idea that they had an aquatic city. Kind of got shoved in there weirdly, but yeah, I love the idea of PCs going into an aquatic city, maybe acquiring a couple of items allow them to breathe underwater or navigate underwater, like, I don't know, putting like some kind of weird jellyfish or over their heads that gives them an air pocket, or some kind of weird like starfish over their mouths that pumps oxygen into them. Psst, I wrote a book with those in there. Anyway, um, Daniel says, "Why don't?" You already hit that comment, but I still love that scene. I still, even in the trailer, it's so sweet, so sweet. Deadman says, "Correction, that was Ganymede, not Europa. Was it Ganymede? I thought Europa was the oceanic moon. Hmm. Someone's moving moons on me." Michael says, because of that example, when I played a white dragonborn barbarian, my DM at the time gave me a tail and a swim speed. He preferred all meals raw and cold and loved half frozen fish. You know what? When it comes to monstrous races, I feel like there's too much of a default to a person in a suit, right? It's the classic Star Trek thing where all the races are basically just like plastic things across the nose and the ears, and there's not much different between being a human. And I feel like monstrous races are not treated as monsters much, like eating raw fish and laying eggs and being cold blooded. At least talking about uh, lizard type of races, but even the other monstrous races, their intentions, their breeding, the way they live, and things like that. I like those narrative elements. Zamara says, "Well, if I may, DBJ, the reason why we hesitate is because we have very few real life extended examples. Some with air battles, swamp battles on the some with air battles. I mean, excuse me, the same with air battles. Swamp battles, on the other hand, yeah, I do agree with you. Like, we do have very few examples of that, even in pop culture. Like, I don't mean real life examples of aquatic battles or whatnot, which we do. Most of them involve heavy military or things like that, which won't fit into our fantasy. But we also don't see very much of that in our fantasy intellectual properties as well. Like we don't see a lot of that in science fiction. We don't see a lot in fantasy, and it is very alien, right? Like I feel like aquatic encounters are as alien as it would take to describe our astronauts going to an alien world. And so it's I do understand why it isn't, but I'm just like, oh, maybe we should have more of that in our lives, more tentacle, more tentacle, always more tentacle. Dead Man says Europa is also an ice covered oceanic moon, but the 30-kilometer shell and 200-kilometer ocean was Ganymede. Okay, all right. All right. Maybe Europa's got a little bit of a ice envy. Have you thought about that? Gribel says, I don't like that either. When an elf is just a human with long ears, a dwarf is a short bearded human. Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Me too. I feel like for example, in the world of A Dead Man's Guide to Dragon Grin, by the Absolute Tabletop guys, they're dwarves. When they die, they turn to stone. And I like the idea of like elves being alien and just like staring off in the distance and maybe not eating the same foods or not understanding certain terms or phrases or even even like uh, both biologically being a bit different. I don't mind the breeding together, but I'm saying like maybe there are some certain biological differences, like body temperatures or coloring, or and then of course when you add in the arcane, like dwarves turning to stone when they die, or elves fading away into a dreamscape or something when they pass on, or even little things like that. I just love I feel like if you're going to be a different race, if you're going to say they are different species, then to treat them that way. I do miss that. I'm with you, Gribel. I'm very much like that. Most people treat elves as just being humans that with big ears. Okay. Co-host Mike says, apologize for the name. His name was Raz Zalvan. Yes, I played him very bestial. One real threat was the party letting him eat captives, or at least parts of them. Yeah, there's a role playing game that a guy developed, Andrew Wood developed, called 77 Thrones, within the Ring of Fire, and you could play character races that were cannibalistic, or rather, they ate sentient species. Technically, not cannibalistic, but whatever. Samara says, if we may focus on mindsets, D&D states lizard folk think different. They either rest, fight, or or F. Basically, mate. They desire on instinct rather than advancement. Um, Moving to second part. Where, oops, it's man, I tried to do this. Leaning on that would be great role playing. You don't understand smiling or laughing, or even worse, do it to show the humans you are one of them, no matter the circumstances. Could you imagine like? Could you imagine there's a dinner or something, and the lizard folk, so PC's playing like lizard folk, and someone cracks a joke, and the lizard folk is like ha 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 and laughs, and they're like, oh, okay, he gets the joke. And then someone else is like, yeah, my cousin died when they, from a disease or something, and they've ravaged their body, and I'm so sad. And the lizard folks like does the exact same laugh, like, yeah, I understand. And they're like, what the hell? Or could be like the Kazin, hey, you show your teeth, I'm going to kill you. So when humans laugh, it's like, why are you being violent to me? Like, violent? What do you mean violent? Like, you show your teeth. That means you're aggressive. Oh man. Michael says there's another encounter from Out of the Box 2 called Feeding Time. It looks like bullywugs with a captive suspended by a rope from a tree over a pond. The real threat is the froggy within the pond. Yep. We don't get too many. See, that's another thing. We don't get too many trap like dangers around water that would be really cool. The classic tied tied by your feet or your wrists or your ankles, dangling over a watery surface with something dangerous down below, or um, a a player character and or a MacGuffin, like an innocent individual or someone they have to capture, put into a cage, dangled over a lake, dropped into the lake. Now the player characters are like, okay, there's something down in the water, but we've got to swim down there, maybe get the rogue down there to pick the lock, or a mage or something like that to pick the lock or blast the lock off to get the person out of the cage who is now drowning because the cage is now sinking or has sunk to the bottom of the lake. And then of course you have hilarity ensuing, right? I think water has a lot of tension and danger in it. Even if you don't know what rules you're going to use, you can always use it as a threat, right? Player characters are down deep in the dungeon and all of a sudden a crack in the wall or someone pulls a lever or a stone, a big heavy block was moved, and all of a sudden it starts to fill with water, and now the PCs are like, what the hell? Oh, and then something eel like, I'm trying to stay away from tentacles, eel like swims out into the water and brushes against your ankle. It feels a little shocking. Something like that. So yeah, I love it. Anyway, Michael goes on to say, I also have another one called Lonely Boat. Look at the fine print under Mimic. They can take the shape of objects. A small rowboat is an object, and based on physics, displacement means it floats. Yeah. Don't Seriously, you're gonna have people get in a boat, a Mimic boat. I love it. A Mimic boat sticking to you makes drowning a real threat. Although you do realize that some player characters might want to stay inside the floating Mimic because they don't want to fall into the water, depending on what's there. That's kind of weird, but it's true. Encounters are usually sea monster, kill monster, loot monster. I prefer encounters that have problems or puzzles. Things are rarely as they seem. Yeah. I'm so with you there. I just love having the problem itself. Like, let's go back to the sinking ship. A sinking ship, usually we're going to have a MacGuffin on the ship. It could be, and when I say MacGuffin, it could be objects, people, important things, allies. You have different rooms on a sailing vessel if it's a large enough ship, and maybe it's sinking and tilting. So you have the difficulty of scrambling up and down as the ship starts to move. And I feel like difficult terrain is simple, but it's not dynamic enough. It's just a condition rather than a thing that you push and pull and bother with that I think is something else. I mean, like, for example, if a hole blasts open in the side of a ship through, I don't know, a cannonball or dragon turtle or something, and the water rushes in, I mean, do you make strength checks or dexterity checks to stand up on your feet when the water's rushing in? Maybe the same could be done in a sewer, or crashing waves on a beach or something like that. I just like the idea of, all right, every round you're going to have to make a roll, or you're going to have to hold off one of your actions to hold on to something so you don't get knocked down because of a thing happening because of a thing. Mm-mm-mm-mm-mm. Anyway, homebrew drowning rules. You can hold your breath for your constitution value in rounds. Damage reduces that amount on a point for point basis. Ooh, it's a lot faster. See, that's another great way. I thought of the of instead of making it per minute, make it per. Okay, the normal fifth edition is you can hold your breath a number of minutes equal to your positive constitution modifier, minimum 30 seconds. So if you got a zero or negative modifier, it's 30 seconds. You got a +2 modifier, it's 2 minutes. Or yes. So anyway, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. That's a little too long. And I don't mean that people can't hold their breath that long. I'm saying I'm saying the tension of being able to hold your breath that long removes any threat of actually drowning when you're fighting something underwater. It just makes it go like, oh, I'm a badass, I'm a barbarian, I'm gonna hold my breath and fight the tentacle creature. I'll never drown. When there should be a threat of that. I'm not saying it should happen automatically, but it should be a threat. Lizard folk as geckos with jerky, yes, jerky movements. I That's what happens with autocorrect. Anyway, I get it. So lizard focus geckos with jerky movement, sometimes almost catatonic, and my personal fave, licking their eyes mid conversation. It licking their eyes. You mean like literally like lizard folk licking their tongue out to lick someone else's eyes? Because I'm liking that if that's not what you meant, because they smell with their tongues or something like that. I'm liking that. I'm liking that a lot. Zamara says, I've actually set that up in my game. My players have gone through a swamp 2 times now and have. The first time had a described close encounter with what they think is a giant croc. Um, ooh, I'm glad you split that up. The second time they noticed it just eyeing them from the swampy lake. They have to go back through the swamp after this mission. Cool. That's awesome. See, and listen, the way you're describing it, right? Like it does. They don't even need to encounter it, but having it just look at them from the water, in Florida had dinner in Florida, and then over the edge, people were like, "Oh, there's an alligator down there," and I think it was like a 3 or 4 footer or something, and they just happen to be around. They're just there with their eyes floating barely above the surface and whatnot. They're not, they are animalistic, but they're not brutal. Or no, let me take that back. They're not aggressive. Let's put it that way. A lot of times they eat and they're like, I've eaten. I can hold off for a week or so. And so just having a threat of that in a swamp is pretty damn cool. Michael says, I ran a sinking ship encounter. It became a contest of how many people have the mending cantrip at the same time. Oh man, I love the gecko eye licking too. I love that too because it's freaky. It's like I'm just trying to be nice. Stop licking my fake. Oh, stop it. Well, you have those. You have that danglia hanging off of your eyelids. What's that about? Lick, lick, lick. Like those are called eyelashes. Whatever. They're really cool. That's what you meant some more. I didn't want to misproduce. Like DBJ, Florida cats are beautiful creatures. Florida cats. But side note, for those who do not live in Florida, especially because a lot of people that find the show are overseas, Florida cats are alligators, or are they crocodiles? Anyway, they are very common in Florida because Florida is basically a giant swamp. And there are plenty of signs around that tell you not to walk small pets, small dogs near particular areas because they will cross from one watery surface to another, and overnight you won't see them, and they'll just sit in there. They've eaten small pets, relatively relatively common enough to have an actual group of individuals whose only job is to find these alligators and take them, rescue them and take them from one place to another to get them out of pools of water in like apartment complexes and things like that. So yeah, anyway, Zamara says Florida cats are beautiful creatures. If they didn't have the issue of biting off people's toes, I would try to get one as a pet. Yeah, yeah, oh yeah, hell yeah, absolutely. And of course, guess what, I'm assuming that you have some relationship to Florida cats. For you, good for you. For me, hell no. Right? So I've often brought that up. Like, just because the player characters think like, I don't know, owl bears or something are dangerous, there's probably a group of people that are like, oh, I like my pet owl bear. Hey, come here, come here, buddy, buddy. And, PCs are like, damn it, get away from that thing. Anyway, Mike Gould says sea hags as serial drowners is a plot rarely used. Serial drowners, damn. There's an out of the box with a freshwater sea hag called Lonely Annie. She'll fake calling for help in a marsh. Her lantern is actually a wisp in a fake lantern. Oh, I like that. I like that. Oh man, sea hags, sirens. What's the aquatic dryad? Is it a merid or naid? Something like that. Serial drowner. Ouch. Yeah. Ow. That's why s- uh, 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 the classic idea of sailors, um, uh, throwing coins and making blessings to the sea gods because of the worry of being enchanted by monsters out there. That's why on a lot of those maps they right off in the corners like here be dragons and such. So they felt like there were those dangers out there, and I'm pretty sure a lot of whales were considered dragons at the time. And who's to say that they weren't in their own heads? You know, Zamara says actually I think I should do that with Atil, have him harvest enemy toes and fingers for berries to eat as he walks. That's pretty nasty. I like that. Starts pulling a finger out and like bites something chunky. It's like, ooh, a ring. Everyone's like, pulls the ring off, chews the finger, throws the ring away. Like, wait, what are you doing? Like, oh, you want some? No, the ring. Like, oh yeah, that thing. Yeah, it happens. It's a hazard. Oh man, I for some sorry, I just got the image of opening up a bag of chips. I don't know. You didn't say that, but I just had this idea of this lizard folk like opening up like a bag of chips they just purchased at the corner store, and it's like, oh. Vampinoid says, just thought about an arakokra that makes food for the party. Hey, I made dinner. Proceeds to spit out food onto plates like a mama bird. Oh no. So what does the lawful good paladin who has or the bard that's got diplomacy skills do? Do you eat it? Do you swallow down your revulsion and eat it like they would? Or do you just go, no, this is enough. That's enough. You need to stop. The Eric Coker's like, peck, 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 peck. What's wrong? Peck, 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 peck. I collected it for you. Ooh, could you imagine ruining a diplomacy between the avian peoples that that a certain bird folk are known as the finest of the finest in cuisine. Only they vomit up the best of the best. Michael says her goal is to drown victims in the mud. Sorry, I'm just thinking vomiting. Uh, oh, chef. The encounter is actually called "Cry for Help." That's awesome. Yeah. Mike says, Marids are water-based djinns. Is okay. It's not. It's either Marid or Naiads or something like that. One of them is the. It doesn't matter. Listen, they're in the water. They're dangerous as hell. It's scary as f. Whatever. Ooh, Mufa. Hey, what's going on? Wooden wooden Aarakocra. I pronounced the first A. Be mad if you had scrambled eggs for breakfast. Ooh, ooh. The Aarakocra is like could care less about anything, but all of a sudden you're like crack, psst, and they're just like, you mother, that was my cousin. Draw weapons, mofo. Michael says, I also have another encounter with a Fae-based mermaid that lives in wells. It sings to lure victims into the well. Dropping coins in a well prevents this fate. There's a lot of that too. With the charming thing to get people, because most people are afraid of water, like myself. Not afraid. I swim and all that kind of stuff, but the ocean, I'll go into on a beach, but like the deep ocean, it 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 boggles my mind, and that's funny because I like to go cruising, but it's weird. Zamara says more third pillar. Okay, you see a large multi tree spanning city. Okay, in the forest, it's abandoned, but we'll take care of. But we'll take care of it until it rains and the frog folk come out. Oh, so it's like so you see a giant city like in the trees, and you see like the walkway spanning and the limbs are linked together like in the canopy, and the PCs are like, I wonder why it's empty. That's weird. The people moved out, and then all of a sudden, you just starts to rain, and poof, when lightning strikes and the torrential rain, and all of a sudden, you just hear ribbit, ribbit, and they start like coming out of the water and coming up the tree, up the side of the tree. And the PCs are like trying to have their long rest, and they're like, what the hell? Don't lick the frogamith. Don't lick the frogamith. You'll get addicted. Oh man. Mm-mm-mm. Let's see. But just before we get out of here, Michael says I also have another encounter with a fae-based. Oh, wait, boom! And the follow-up comment is it's a way to place aquatic encounters anywhere, like in a well. All right, so let me end it this way. There's plenty of man-made or aquatic things that we can add that aren't normally aquatic, like for example, aqueducts, wells, of course, sewer systems where water drains. We also have like aquifers and things of that nature where maybe there's a spring or a lake, river, waterfalls, or other examples. A moat, classic castle with a moat around it is one as well. Also, you might have strangely built cities. I remember, um, although I thought of it too, but there was a third edition 3XX book with a city that was built up. Not it wasn't a well, it was a vertical city, but it was basically a city state. So it had these giant walls, and the city kept building on top of the old things. But when it would rain, the bottom of the city was filling up, and there was a character class known as a rafter, and you could go down into the undercity when it stopped raining, and the water would drain down, and you could go through these like fallen towers that were on their side, and you could venture into it horizontally instead of vertically. And there was this really great image of sailing vessels sailing up to the city walls and being lifted up by cranes up the walls to be added on top of. And I always thought that would be really cool to use in like a caldera or something, where the players are on a sailing vessel to go towards this like semi-active volcano, and then they have to go up a series of locks that lift the ship up and all that kind of stuff to get inside of the caldera. Or there's a society around the edge of the lip of the volcano that's filled with rainwater and things like that, but the people live inside of it. I think that would be kind of cool. Aqueduct, underappreciated hero. Yep, just like Aquaman behind me, or yeah, right there. Zamora says I might come up with more aquatic and swamp environments and put them in the Discord. Ooh, ooh, that'd be awesome. And listen, I'm not suggesting that like we're all stupid for not doing it. That's not my point. I guess I really sometimes I lament the things that we do in role playing games just because I feel like sometimes there's just things that are missing. Like why not add it in there? Why not have a dungeon that where I don't know, there's a war between the drow and the dwarves or something, and the drow are like, we're gonna get rid of the dwarves, and they find an aquifer, and their mission is to bust the wall down to have it flood the dwarven enclave or something, and the PCs are like moving against the clock because dwarves for some reason don't like the PCs. They don't trust them, but they're like, you need to get out of here. And then of course they hear the rumbling and the rushing of water from miles away as it shakes the very foundations of the Underdark. And the PCs are like, what do we do? Like, well, how long do we stay here? And they have to scramble up to the surface as the water levels keep rising and rising, and the dwarven community gets half flooded out or something. Hell, just being underground and feeling water dripping on the back of your neck, and you look up and you can like put your ear against the wall, you can hear the rushing of water above you, would just make me have to bring out the brown pants, right? Lemonade in the front, chocolate in the back, right? So it would just be, I anyway. You guys know where I'm headed, and again, we could talk about this for days on end about aquatic adventures and amphibian adventures. We really didn't hit too much about reskinning too many monsters, but man, we'll get to that. There's plenty of monsters we could that aren't normally aquatic that make a lot of sense to make them aquatic. Like I was thinking, like trolls make a good example. Orcs are a pretty good example. Although you might go, well, wouldn't they just be merfolk? But I don't know. You could make the case of giving like blue skinned orcs or something because they kind of already have the green skin. Yep. Mike says a deep underwater subterranean sea elf enclave would be a huge surprise to Drow or Dwygar who try to pull that move. Like how? Yeah, how did these Drow die from drowning? Yeah, how did that happen? Dro, I don't know. I like Drow, but you get the point, right? Like, how did they die from drowning? And how? What a twist would it be for the player characters to go into the Underdark and all of a sudden it becomes an aquatic adventure, and they're like, "What the hell?" And it's all completely underwater. That's why the Drow never took over because they could never assault the sea elves that are down underwater who are blind, pale blind with pink eyes because they navigate through, I don't know, radar or something, sonar or something like that. Yeah, sonar, not radar. But you get the point. Tremor sense. Guys, thank you so much for being part of the show. I really appreciate it. Got to get out of here. Going on a little bit too far. Please go and check out levelup5e.com. Please like, share, subscribe, do all the usuals. The algorithms really love it. I'm thinking there's got to be something. I'm missing something. So whatever. The brain farts. That's what happens. There's a massive sea called the Dark Lake. The Dark Lake. That would be. I don't think, as an adventurer, I would want to swim in an underdark ocean. That's yeah. Michael's like Future Friday. Yeah, we'll have to do. Yeah, okay, we'll have to do a something for Future Friday. We'll have to. I'm not sure exactly what yet, but it's going to be within the same theme, so we'll do it. Maybe alien invasion or something. Yeah, let's do alien invasion. Okay, so tomorrow, Future Friday, alien invasion, and then let's migrate back to our usual Monster Monday, Trope Tuesday, and whatnot. Because I got away from it, and that's kind of the theme of the show. So yeah, let's do that. All right, so guys, I'll see you tomorrow. I got to get out of here. Got to head off to work. You guys have a great one. I